Welcome to Foxfire Focus, the podcast that brings clarity and insight to the industry's most relevant issues. Foxfire's mission is to provide the best service experience in eye care. So, we hope you enjoy what you're about to hear and that this information provides some perspective on the exciting opportunities facing our profession. For more information about Foxfire, please visit us at foxfiresg.com. Foxfire, taking care of your practice so you can manage your patients.
Hi, and welcome to Foxfire Focus. I'm your host, Tim Nichols, and today our guest is Jay Binkowitz. Jay needs no introduction to you Foxfire users because your system includes the Edge, and that's really a great way to get information about everything that you need to know in your practice. So, Jay, welcome.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay. Now, you really have made a very large footprint in the industry because of the special product that you have brought to the market. Tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to be such a guru in the optical world.
I appreciate the elevating me to a new level with your wordsmithing. But I don't know if I consider myself the guru. There's a lot of good people out there. I can say that my partner, Dr. Mark Stalin, and I, when we got together, we really hit the pavement hard, so to speak, as we say in New York, to really understand our business. Excuse me. And we became very good with managed vision care. We understood how to be profitable with managed vision care in a very diverse community. Our practice back in the day was located in Astoria, Queens, Western Queens, where we had 144 nations represented. So on any given day, we were doing eye exams in 5 languages. And the two of us were a great tag team. We really understood our patients, but most importantly, we really understood the business.
Yeah.
And with that, we developed strategies. Eventually, I was invited to a peer group meeting in Georgia where I met Dr. Kirk Smick, who I didn't know who Dr. Kirk Smick was at the time. And he is, and still is, probably the top 10 most influential people in the industry ever. He has done more for continuing education and solidifying the place for independent optometry than anybody else I know. But there I am in a meeting with Kirk and Buzzy Sass and Chris Hobson, Stuart Tasman, and I'm telling him about my strategies. And Kirk says, I want you to start teaching. And I was like, I'm not a teacher. And he goes, yeah, I want you to start teaching. I said, yeah, tell your friends to give me a call. He goes, no, I want you to teach at Expo. And I was like, I've never done that. Next thing you know, there I am teaching at Expo. And put together a course basically called The Road to a Healthy Practice. And it was little bits and snippets of all the things my partner and I had learned. And that led to me speaking quite often. Ultimately, we created a what we call the GPN Power Day. And we had a mini conference in Georgia. And Tri-Throat today. And a lot of folks came to try to understand business strategies. And it made me realize how thirsty everybody was for more information to understand their business. And GPN Consulting was born out of that. That led to me saying, okay, well, we can only talk to so many people in a day. Is there a way that we could see what's going on in their practice? And we ended up developing the Edge. So it could look in on your system. And remotely, I can get on the phone and coach you and say, hey, here's what I see what's happening. Here's what I would do about it. And Edge led to more consulting led to more Edge. And eventually, GPN became, in its day, one of the largest consulting on-site business management consulting companies, as well as what it is today, which is one of the largest technology companies in the industry. So we've had an amazing journey. It sounds simpler and easier than it was. Believe me, there were plenty of sleepless nights in lonely hotels. But you know what? Great team, unbelievably fortunate to find Most everybody on my team is smarter than I am. So I will say that I'm unbelievably fortunate to find so many wonderful, smart, great people that shared the vision of how do we bring value to independent optometry.
Yeah. I think I met you probably 20 years ago during that time in which you were pounding the pavement, talking to people about numbers. And a good friend, Terry Bonds, invited you, I think, to Alabama to speak to us there. Yeah, so that went back a long.
That's right.
So, yeah. And, fast forward then about, I guess it was probably 10, 11, 12 years after that, we run into each other on the floor at Seco, and I'm there looking for software. And one of the must-haves on my list was that it needed to talk to you and be able to give me the kind of information that I knew you were pulling out of software systems to be able to give doctors the numbers they needed, to be able to manage the practice. So, yeah, it's been a long journey, but here we are, full circle.
Yeah. And even today, Ed Buffington's our CEO. I stepped out of the president and CEO seat and was able to put my arms around Ed Buffington, an industry ambassador. We call him the legend. There's nobody smarter or better than Ed Buffington. And I was really fortunate that he agreed to take the helm as I moved on to other initiatives. So he kept running GPN for me and still is to this day. Ed's amazing. Ed's amazing.
Yeah. You've mentioned two names that I hope our listeners are familiar with, Kirk Schmidt and Ed Buffington. Who were some of the other people along the way that kind of came alongside you and really were helpful?
Well, I'll tell you something very interesting. Dr. Mark Feda at IDOC back in the early days had invited me to kind of help with the curriculum, kind of soft director of education title back in the early days. And so I got very friendly with Mark. And Mark really had a great vision, which obviously IDOC today is a tremendous, tremendous resource for the industry. And so that was definitely someone who was important during the journey. But what was interesting about that is I ended up on the speaking circuit, so to speak, and folks like Scott Morris and Ben Gaddy and John Rimpakis and Paul Karpecki and Alan Glazier, these started to be the folks that I was with all the time as we were all road warriors. So we'd see each other all the meetings, we'd gather, we'd complain together, we'd laugh together, we'd drink together. And it really gave me insight into multiple ways of thinking about the industry. So, I've been really, really fortunate to work with some, tremendous industry legends. But one of the most interesting was the first time I was awestruck. So when I was with Dr. Feda, he took me down to the Ultimate Practice Don Teague event down in Florida and said, "Hey, I want you to do one of your stand-up comedies, get up there and speak." And Neil Gelmard was sitting in the back, and there that's Neil Gelmard, and I was like, "Oh my God!" And Neil's sitting in the room while I'm speaking. So now I'm not too much to being intimidated about speaking, but Neil Gelmard was in the room, and I did my whole spiel about separating the profitability from the clinic to the optical and creating two P&Ls and understanding your profit centers. And Neil Gelmard came up to me at the end of that course, and he said, "Jay, you are spot on. That was such a wonderful course, and that's exactly what people should be taught." And he really gave me the pat on the back, so to speak. And to this day, Neil and I are very, very dear friends. And ultimately, through my other business, Kepler, we ended up purchasing Neil Gelmard's practice, and Neil and I work together today.
Oh, that's nice.
It's a great journey. Great journey.
Yeah. You mentioned in the early days, you and your partner in your original practice were embracing managed care. And many doctors have this kind of love-hate relationship with managed care. Yes, it drives practice, drives business into the practice. But part of the frustration that doctors have, I think, is not understanding if they're profitable with managed care. They know they're taking a haircut, but how much of a haircut, and is there a way to make that work? You've made that kind of the core of what you teach people. So give us some more of your insights there about how managed care can be used by an independent.
Well, some people will say they've never met a good managed vision care plan. Other people will say they've never met a bad one. There are different strategies and go to market. It depends on your demographic. It depends on what type of business you want to have. It depends on what type of services you want to provide. So there are variables. It's not a one size fits all. It's not going to be great for everybody. But ultimately, managed vision care was looked upon as another marketing vehicle. They were going to bring more patients to us, right? And so, that's how we kind of looked at it and said, okay, if they're going to bring more patients to us, the little bit we're giving up is saving us on marketing. And so, it's marketing money is really what we're giving up. So that's the way my partner and I used to look at it. But then you had to understand how to work with them. And most folks read the contract, but never really understood how to align products and pricing and merchandising and quite frankly, communicating with the patient, making sure that you're educating the patient as to what their plan contributes towards properly. And that's where people kind of fumbled the ball. So I'm not necessarily I'm like for or against managed vision care. I'm not in that kind of area. I believe each business needs to be assessed individually as to what you want to provide. But, for the most part, there's very few instances where I couldn't find a way to be profitable.
Yeah. Well, you've obviously done a lot of things right along the way. But you've probably made some mistakes as well. What do you think of, if I were to say, Jay, tell me your 3 biggest mistakes?
That's really, really funny. I tell people, some folks see my successes. I tell them I've been very blessed. I've had 4 significant successes in my life in more than one industry. But what I tell them is they don't see the 30 failures. So I always believe failure actually builds success. You don't understand or even appreciate success without taking some lumps once in a while. And, there are plenty of times when I've hired the wrong people for the wrong reasons, when I've invested the wrong money in the wrong time in the wrong place, where I found myself on a bus I shouldn't have been on. I found myself sitting in a seat I had no business sitting in. So, there's kind of, and then there's the shiny penny syndrome, which I think a lot of people have, where we get so interested in something, we become enamored with it, that we get blinded by it and really don't weigh out the pros and cons of what that means to us, our family, our business. We want more, more, more. And so, I would say that some of my greatest learning lessons in business is kind of like a bulky snake. So, you start out narrow, and then all of a sudden you get confident and you say, oh, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. You do more. And then you're like, oh my God, I'm out of control. Now we got to bring it back in. I got to get control. And then you keep going, and then you do it again. and so you go down the road like this, narrowing your focus, widening your focus. And it's all about learning and experimenting. And of course, people who are in business generally are ambitious. They want to grow. And so you're in that role. Well, I've been wide quite a few times when I shouldn't have been. But I would say for the most part, people was a very significant learning lesson for me. I did not know, and it wasn't their fault, it was my fault. Through the different businesses I've owned, I really didn't know which people I should be hiring. I had never done it before. So there were some people I hired. They weren't bad people. They weren't incapable of working, but they were not the right person for the role. And that's costly. It's costly to them because they just invested time in hopefully a new career. It's costly to you because you just wasted time in an area. So So I would say one of my biggest failures up front was understanding who are the right people to hire and when. Mm-hmm. And I think we all kind of go through that a little bit. Sometimes we hire anybody just to make sure there's a body in the front door. But most of the time, we really need to assess the right people to hire. I would say that's still the number one area for any business is its people.
Right. Absolutely. Well, as we think about kind of where the industry is, where the industry is going, one of the things that's been a big game changer for a lot of practices is the influx of private equity money and the removal of individual practice control from many, many players in the market. What do you think about the private equity situation with large chunks of practices moving into a different space? Where do you see that leading independent optometry?
Tim, as you know, and a lot of people know, I'm one of the original founders of Kepler, as I joined up with Dr. Ben Gaddy, which is really a great story because back in 2016, I was at a meeting in Calgary with Ben and I. We didn't even know we were going to be there. We went out to dinner that night. We just started complaining. Ben had 4 locations, legacy practice from his dad. You know, Ben Gaddy is absolutely a guru. And he was discussing with me. He wasn't happy with his opportunities. I wasn't happy with my opportunities. And we started, putting on the back of the napkin, so to speak, of what we thought was important to a consolidation platform. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, we ended up forming Total Eye Care Partners, which eventually became Kepler. We felt the legacy of the practice, the intimacy that practice has with the community had to stay in place. We felt that we had a responsibility to preserve independent optometry, not just commercialize it. So, we had a very, very strong vision. Since both of us were such strong advocates for independence, we didn't want to see that go away. At the same token, let's face facts. If someone has a $2 million practice, and back in the day they would have been paid $1 million for it, and would have had to wait 5 years to get paid, versus a $2 million practice that someone's offering you $3 million cash today, well, that's a game changer in people's lives. So you can't boo-hoo private equity when they've enriched the exit strategy. And I always say, quite frankly, the whole industry owes a big, pat on the back to Sue Downs from my eye doctor, because she really broke through the ceiling in creating value for every independent. It doesn't matter which model you like, you don't like, which country club you want to belong to, whatever the case may be. Sue Downs broke through the ceiling, and everybody has been riding that train ever since. Now, the impact it has ultimately on independent optometry is going to be very interesting. Some models are still very supportive of, like ours, of allowing that name to stay in place and not to be a chain brand, so to speak, and they really want to keep a little bit more of the intimacy that practice has locally. There's all different models. It's not that one is better than the other; they're just different. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, independent optometry, in and of itself, is private equity is not going to wipe out independent optometry. Consolidation is not going to wipe out independent optometry. Making a little bit of a left turn, I have something I call the drought, which I do a course on in Expo now, where I did a study with information I got from Richard Edlow about the lack of optometrists that we have and the lack of ophthalmologists we have, and what that ultimately means by the year 2030, when we won't have enough optometrists or ophthalmologists at all to care for our patients. So while people talk about private equity and what's happening in independent optometry, there's an explosion of opportunity. Optometrists have never been more valuable than they are today, and are going to only increase their value as they move forward. There are going to be specialties where optometrists are only doing glaucoma and dry eye and nothing else. I always talk about ultimately we're going to end up in an area where we're going to need ophthalmological physician assistants and optometric physician assistants. We're going to need new categories of healthcare providers, because there aren't enough ophthalmologists, because there aren't enough optometrists. I see an explosion coming our way due to the drought that's in our place. that I think is going to recreate the definition of independent optometry.
I think you're spot on. And I think that's really exciting. I believe it is a very exciting time to be an optometrist, as you say. And rather than bemoan changes, let's look for opportunities.
And they're huge. I wrote a business thesis on a practice that only sees patients 3 days a week, only works 40 weeks per year, is one doctor and 2 assistants. It's only 3 people, not in a typical practice, in like a medical office. And I wrote it without an optical. So all they're doing is dry eye and glaucoma and some scleral lenses, not even regular fit lenses, right? And in that thesis, I've shown where an optometrist can make well over $300,000 a year, working 3 days a week, 40 weeks a year. So, I encourage people to start thinking differently and to start moving into different directions and specializing. I think that's only going to further validate the importance of independent optometry and bring more opportunity and fortune to them.
Exactly. Many of them, particularly my generation, started into practice trying to be all things to all people. And I believe those days are coming to an end for many, many practices. Maybe in some markets, that's what you need to be. But as you say, the opportunities for doing things that are deeply needed by our patients, they still value that face time with that old trusted doctor, but that doctor is going to be doing maybe it's something a little different that differentiates them from everybody else. Yeah.
Back in the day, my wife's from Europe, so we would travel quite a bit back and forth. And I noticed, 15, 20 years ago, that the definition of independent optometry is very different in Europe. I defined it as 3 to 30. So an independent typically didn't have a single location. There were a group of independents that somewhere in the realm of 3 to 30 locations. So it was kind of like a different definition.
Wow.
And it was like in the low 20 percentile was the market share back then of independent optometry based on this definition. And so 15, 20 years ago, I said, that's where we're going. Yeah. And ironically, that is kind of where we're going through the consolidation groups. But the care and the relationships these doctors have with their patients have only expanded. They've only gotten better. And yet, they don't have to worry about as much of the business problems as they used to. So there's great opportunities in that arena. And I just see independent optometry flourishing as we go through this evolution, even though it's a little painful. But much to what you said, there's always going to be that practice that serves everybody, does a great job. But that practice is going to be served by an optometrist that's really, really cares about the relationships within the practice and cares about the numbers in the practice. Yeah. Someone who's running a good, solid business and is an all culture to the heart person. Those practices are always going to do well.
Yeah. Well, Jay, that's great information, and we really appreciate the time that you spent with us and what you've contributed to our industry. So keep it up.
Thank you, Tim. Always a pleasure. I've really appreciated our journey and all the funning that you and I have done along the way. There's been a lot of funning, a lot of ribbing along the way. It's always been great to share with you. And Corey, tremendous. Corey's, I consider, also a brilliant contributor to the industry as well. So you guys just keep doing what you're doing and keep getting the word out there.
All right. Thanks, Jay. Well, Foxfire Focus. We'll see you again soon.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody.